you're speaking to a broader topic around mental health, which is huge in sports right now. And how do you balance, we'll say, the mental aspects of sport, the mental side of sport, with everything else going on being a teenager?
Yeah, mental health is very serious and it's also very prevalent in the sports community right now. And I think for me, the best thing is just having support specifically. And for me, that's my mom and just having her as an outlet and someone to share my feelings to, someone to vent to, someone that I can go and just talk to at the end of the day.
That it's not just the physical side, that there's a huge psychological component. Youth athletes are encouraged to try multiple sports early on and then specialize later on. You are unique in bobsledding in that you've specialized somewhat earlier than the typical window of early 20s. What's your thought on that for athletes?
I think a good piece of advice for young athletes who are starting out and maybe wanting to specialize in a specific sport and pursue that is to really push yourself to those goals, let yourself fail, and learn from all of those mistakes.
Before we start, thank you for all the DMs and great feedback on Cool Conversations, which I love to hear, so keep it coming. And what would help us even more is if you choose to subscribe. It helps me to bring you more amazing guests and cool conversations. Now let's dive into the episode. Emily, welcome to Cool Conversations. You are only 16 and already making waves in the world of bobsledding as a top-ranked athlete in the world, having competed in the Winter Youth Olympic Games. Can you take us back to when it all started?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to speak with you. And so, yeah, I'm involved in bobsledding, and bobsledding is this sport where we put ourselves in these big sleds. We start at the top of a mile-long ice track, which are all different across the world, and we go from a dead stop to pushing as fast as we can, 0 to 100. Then we jump in, and we actually have to drive and steer all the way down these mile-long ice tracks at various different speeds. So, where it all started for me was actually back in 2022, watching the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing. And I'd been watching bobsled like I do every single Winter Olympics. And at Beijing, the monobob event was actually this was the first time where it was introduced. And so I had grown up around bobsled. My dad was a bobsledder for the US national team. And so I'd heard his stories. I'd seen his memorabilia growing up. But this was the first time watching monobob and watching the US team actually win gold in this event was the first time where I took a really big interest in bobsled. And so I went to my dad and I actually asked him, like, is bobsled something that I could get involved in? I'm kind of interested in trying it out. And fast forward about 2 months later, him and I were on a plane headed to Lake Placid, New York to go try out bobsledding for the very first time. And I went to a training camp for about a week. I absolutely loved the sport, fell in love with it immediately. And now I've been competing for 2 seasons. I competed with the Youth Olympic team, traveled all over Europe, went to Korea for the Winter Youth Olympic Games. And now I've been training all summer and I'm preparing for my 3rd season with the US team and going into my 1st season where I'm actually competing outside of the youth tour.
Wow, that's a fascinating journey. And there's so much to unpack here. So you grew up aware of bobsledding through your own dad's participation in the sport. And then what about yourself? Did you participate in youth sports or school sports as a young kid?
Yeah, I actually, throughout school and when I was younger, I played softball. I was a catcher. I played up until my freshman year of high school, and I absolutely loved it. I loved playing softball. Um, and then I started to, at the end of my freshman year, when I actually went to go in try out bobsledding, that's when I decided to really focus on that sport. And I felt a true passion for bobsledding, like I hadn't felt necessarily for softball previously. So it was this first time where I felt like this sport was something where I belonged. It was something I was meant to do, and it was this true passion that I felt for it. So that's when I just decided to kind of switch over and focus on bobsledding and kind of put all my energy into that and transition away from softball.
So, Emily, when we spoke to Aaron Maguire, the CEO of USA Bobsled and Skeleton, he mentioned the idea of talent transfer. how athletes from different sports can bring skills that translate well into bobsledding. And I'm curious, with your background in softball, do you think any of those skills helped you to transition into the world of bobsledding, or was it completely a new challenge?
I think softball, because bobsled is such a unique sport, there's nothing really that can correlate to it. I mean, a lot of our athletes in the program come from a track background, or even some of the guys come from a football background. But I think because bobsled is such a unique sport, that softball and even having, background in sprinting and track athletes, it's just so different. Sprinting on ice and going from 0 to 100 and having that explosiveness is so different and so unique that it's just a completely different ball game.
I cannot imagine it coming from a track background myself and spikes on solid ground. It's really nice. I mean, it's just another level altogether. And so fascinating and exciting and thrilling. And I imagine that there's so many different skills to it, the technicalities of it. How did you find when you took it up? What was how that must have been challenging. How was that experience for you?
Yeah, the first time I was in Lake Placid, this was actually like the first time that I found that I had that real passion, and like a moment that really stood out to me being in Lake Placid was when my dad was trying to teach me how to bobsled, and he was trying to coach me how to drive down the Lake Placid track. And there's nothing you could really correlate bobsledding to. There's no simulator beforehand. There's nothing that really compares to it. So my dad was talking about the pressures in the track and when to steer and where to steer and all these other things and these terminology that absolutely made no sense before I'd gotten on the track. But after my first couple of runs and getting to the bottom, and everything in bobsled happens so fast, but I realized that I was able to take what my dad was saying and his coaching and really apply it to my driving when I was on the track. And that's when I realized, like, being able to tweak what I was doing and actually apply his coaching to bobsledding, that's when I realized, like, oh, this is something I want to continue doing and continue to pursue. Because having, first having experience from my dad and then being able to apply all of that coaching, it was just made me realize I need to continue doing this. And I want to keep being able to master and get better at driving.
So it seems like bobsledding's uniqueness really drew you in. But what's even more interesting is the way that you approach the challenge. I think for a lot of people, just the sheer complexity of it could feel pretty intimidating and maybe even off-putting. But you didn't seem to view it that way, and you didn't seem to let the difficulty of it hold you back. What was it that made you lean into the challenge rather than shy away from it?
Yeah, there's definitely challenges that come with bobsledding. There's a lot of them, and bobsledding it's a rough sport. It's a difficult sport both mentally and physically, but yeah, I didn't see these as a negative side of things. I took it as more of a challenge in order to continue to progress in the sport.
That's incredible. And your father being a national level bobsledder is a unique connection. So, how has his role shaped your journey?
Him being a bobsledder, really, if he wasn't a bobsledder for the national team, I don't think I really would ever been involved in this sport at all. So having his experience and then having someone who knows what it takes to be a bobsledder and knows what everything, like, he knows my goals and he knows what it takes to achieve them. So he really pushes me and gives me that insight on how to achieve the goals. It's also being a second generation bobsledder is something that is so unique and special to be a part of. And when I'm traveling to different tracks, these are tracks that my dad has been on before and raced on before. And I'm meeting people in the sport who are involved in the IBSF, the federation, who are coaches and admin. And these are people my dad had raced against before when he was younger. So being a part of that is just something that's so special. And having him by my side as this firsthand coaching experience it has made my journey so much different.
I imagine that there is quite a bit of pressure as well around that. How do you manage that?
Managing the pressure, thankfully, actually, with the Youth Olympic Tour specifically, a lot of the pressure that came with competing was alleviated because all of us athletes we were coming into the sport with the same skill level, same age, kind of brand new to competing. So really a lot of the pressure actually came from learning the tracks, because we were traveling and going to Olympic level tracks where we're using the same equipment, the same speed as these top level Olympians. And we had a very short amount of time, about 5 days, to see the track, learn the track. And then for people who don't know bobsled very well, we have to take two successful runs from the top of the track. So, two successful runs without crashing, crossing the finish line, before we can actually compete in a race. So, we were having to learn these tracks, take two successful runs from the top, and then expected to compete at our very top speed in a very short amount of time. So a lot of the pressure didn't necessarily come from competing. It came from more being expected to learn these tracks in that short amount of time.
That's incredible and very unique to the sport of bobsledding. I mean, a track in track and field, I mean, they're all pretty standard, they're oval, more or less. So I'm curious then, what does that look like to prepare for those tracks in such a short space of time? And is it a case of the more you compete and the more you travel globally that you have familiarity with the tracks?
I'd say, yeah. So every track around the world is completely different. The speeds are different, the technicality is different. Every corner and the way you have to drive the tracks are completely different around the world. So the way we would prepare is there's videos of each track and you can kind of study and watch over. And then we go on what we call track walks, where we actually walk on the ice, and then our coach takes us through and talks us through each corner on how to drive, where you might feel the pressures, what to do in each corner. But really, it wasn't until you take that first run on every single track that you can get a feel for what is actually being said and what that feels like when you're driving and steering in your hands. So there was a lot of preparation. Bobsled is a lot of preparation to compete for about 2 minutes. Each race takes only about 2 minutes in total times when we add them together to decide our rankings. So it's a lot of preparation that goes into sliding before actually doing the sliding.
That is very intense. Could you take us through a typical training, day, maybe perhaps, and maybe that's the physical and mental side of it, or just give us a little insight into preparation?
Yeah, training days are very long. They usually start early in the morning, and a lot of the times we were in these mountain towns. So I'll take specifically Korea. We had to get up early and then take a bus that was about 10-15 minutes over to the track itself. And then a lot of the preparation is our sled. So we have to sometimes for the Youth Olympic Games, we were so gracious enough to have mechanics who would handle our sleds and make sure everything was safe for all of us youth athletes, make sure our runners were put on and all that sort of thing. But we would have to get to the track early, and then our runners are the things on the bottom of the sled. They're these long pieces of metal, and they have to be really smooth and shiny in order to go fast on the track. So we'd actually take sandpaper at different grits, and we'd have to sand each individual runner, all four of them on the sled, to make sure we could go as fast as possible for race day, for training. And then we would have to bring the sleds to the top of the track, and each athlete would get to take 2 or 3 runs, depending on the training day, down the track. And then it would be sled takedown, so making sure all our sleds are done for the rest of the day, and then getting back to our hotel or wherever we're staying for the night.
Incredible. And then take us through your runs. If I was watching you at the Olympic Games, take me through your experience. What were you experiencing for each of your runs?
The runs, especially the Olympic Games and every race, I think every time my coaches, something that was really harped on me throughout the year was from my dad and from my coaches as well, is the pressures of race day seem to have really got to me. I won't lie, throughout every competition, the race day seemed to really get to me. And I could be having great training runs, and then all of a sudden, race day, the pressures of that, I think I need to change something or do something different. So my coaches would constantly tell me to remember to have fun, that each race has 2 heats. So we get 2 runs, and no matter the results from the first heat, to just treat the second run just the same and to be consistent in that. But bobsledding was a lot of focus. There was a lot of focus that went into each individual run, and we'd get to the top of the line and just have to be sort of clear. Nothing can cloud your mind. And then just really, it was, you don't even have time to think. I can't even describe bobsledding until you really get in one. There's no time to think on the track. You just have to trust yourself and trust that you know what's happening through the corners.
How did you come to trust yourself? What is it that allows you to trust yourself? The thrill of it, the speeds at which you're going, and to slide into that moment where you feel like you're in flow. What does that feel like, and how do you get to that? How does that, getting into flow is challenging for a lot of athletes, and particularly with bobsled. What does the preparation and front loading that beforehand to be allow yourself to arrive at that position, and then walk us through what it feels like to be in flow for you?
Really, there's a lot of the preparation that we do, a lot of the track walks, and being able to have such great coaching from my dad and from my other coach on the Youth Olympic Tour, which was Brian Berghorn, having those two to support us and to be able to ask those questions to when we're going on track walks and watching video, those that preparation is really what makes me feel good when I get to the sled. It makes me feel ready, like I know what to do. And then getting in the sled is like everything, all the thoughts, all the negatives, all the nerves kind of just disappear. And once you're in and you're set and you have your hands on the D rings and you're ready to go down the track, all those nerves kind of just vanish and you just feel ready to go down the track. And then the really like the way the track flows from corner to corner is you feel that and you can feel it in your hands. You just feel like you're going with the track. There's not a moment where you can think about, oh, I hit a corner there, or oh, the next corner coming up. You just feel involved with the ice track as you're going down.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And it sounds so exhilarating. And when you were competing in the Youth Olympic Games, huge event, and I know that you were battling illness, and you had some fatigue. And it's really challenging for athletes to come into moments like this where you're not feeling your 100%. I'd love to know how did you stay mentally strong, and go through that? Can you walk us through that experience and how you managed to push through that?
Yeah, the Youth Olympics was definitely difficult. I had been preparing. I had a really high rank. I was ranked second in the world going into the Youth Olympic Games. So I was feeling really well. I loved Pyeongchang, Korea. I loved that track. So I felt very ready. I had great training runs. And then all of a sudden, 2 days before I was meant to compete, I came down with the flu. And it was really, really difficult. It was the worst I've ever had the flu. I was bedridden. I had to skip out on my last training day. Going into race day, I was so tired. I still had a fever. It was freezing cold that day, about negative 15 degrees outside, and we have to wear these spandex suits that provide no warmth for us at all. So I was really, I had just thought about the journey that I had taken to get there. And no matter what the results of the Youth Olympics, I had given my absolute all into the both of my seasons of racing. And that's what mattered the most to me. It wasn't about where I came out in the Youth Olympics. It was about the fact that no matter what happened that day, I gave my absolute all.
That's remarkable, Emily. That's remarkable because that is a really hard aspect of being an athlete, because we all, we want to win, we want to have our best, and it's so difficult to be able to have that mindset and to be able to look at it in that way. And it's so hard when we can be challenged, with those tough moments when it doesn't go our way, the odds maybe are stacked against us and it doesn't fall the way we want. How do we pick ourselves back up, and how do we frame it? And it sounds like you framed it in a way that was growth orientated, and you framed it in a way of what can I do with where I'm at now, and can I give the best that I have on today, versus looking at everybody else and where everyone else was. And yes, there's the results board, but it sounds like you set yourself a different outcome, and for the Olympic Games, which sounds like then it helped you in terms of move forward.
Yes, I knew the Youth Olympic Games was not my end all. I know I still wanted to compete in the sport of bobsled and still wanted to continue on and grow and compete outside of the monobob event, move into doing two women. Just tried to switch my mindset into giving it that one last push and then being able to go home and rest from being sick.
Incredible. I read that, your dad on Instagram had said something, which I thought was really powerful. He said that the Olympics is all about the journey and the experience. not the medals. And that's the mindset that I hear you talking about today. And how do you feel like that's, helping you face challenges post Olympics and as you're moving forward on your journey towards bigger goals?
I'd say the transition from the Youth Olympics into going to race against girls who are much older, have a lot more experience in the sport, and trying to transition out of that youth range where now we're expected to do a lot more and to advocate a lot more for ourselves. And it's not all about the winning right now, it's about continuing to grow in the sport. It just really helps me and reminds me that, I can, there's still more, there's still, things coming up ahead.
As you mentioned, those amazing goals and ambitions that you have, I'm struck by the amount it takes as a student athlete, and particularly at high school level. I know from my own personal experience, it takes a lot of management and there's a lot more to it. And I'd love to understand and hear your experience. And I'm sure there's lots of parents out there and maybe other youth athletes who are thinking, how are you managing to do it all?
It's a lot. And honestly, my high school experience has been so different from the typical high school experience because my race schedule was so demanding and my travel schedule was so demanding. I've actually had 2 years out of my high school experience where I have started the year in person and learning at the actual high school, and then spent the second half of the year completely online, which gave me a lot of flexibility to be able to travel and to be able to do my sport, which was I was so thankful to be able to do. But it was a hard balance, and training days in the sport of bobsled are very long, so there was give and take some days to unwind and spend doing social time, and then other times to focus on the schoolwork. But yeah, my high school experience was a lot different than a typical one.
Yeah, it absolutely sounds like it. And it also strikes me as, you're from Sacramento. And so you're needing ice, you're needing ice. So you're training, you speak to being 6 months of the year, in different locations. Does that mean that you're moving from Sacramento and relocating to be near ice? Is that required at this level?
So at this point, I spend most of the year, like during my off season right now, I've been spending all my time in Sacramento, and I do lifting and sprinting here at my gym and following a training program. And then, yeah, during the Youth Olympic Tour, a lot of the time we were racing, and I would go to travel away from home, and we'd go spend a couple weeks in Norway and then take a plane from Norway right to Korea and spend a few weeks there, and then a couple weeks home, and we're back traveling again. So there was no point where I had to move completely away to like the Olympic Training Center in New York at this level, but there was still a lot of traveling happening for competition purposes.
Absolutely. And how do you keep the fun in the sport when you're competing at such a high level? How do you keep the fun in it for you?
We actually had so much fun on the Youth Olympic Tour, and really, I have to owe it all to the IBSF, the federation, and specifically Nicola Minicello, who was the coordinator and the organizers of the Youth Olympic Tour. They did so many things where they organized events for all of us athletes, like bowling and different events in Korea where we could learn about the cultures of the places where we were. And they just organized all these events where we as athletes could all bond and connect and have fun together. And then we would take those bonds that happened at those events, and the outside of training, when we had downtime, we would play Uno together with people from the US and Germany and Austria, and we'd all play together or try the snacks from Korea and do all these fun things. So the IBSF worked really, really hard and did a great job at making that experience memorable for us and making sure that we were competing and training hard, but also having fun.
What a positive experience. And especially when you're traveling so much. And as you described, your high school experience isn't the typical experience. And I imagine there's aspects of your life that maybe you feel you've had to maybe not participate in or give up, and miss out in, because of your commitment to bobsledding. What are the biggest sacrifices or challenges that come with it?
Yeah, I think something that people may not realize about competing on the global aspect and being a part of being in my experience that I've had is there are a lot of sacrifices that I've had to make. And that's been one of the biggest challenges is, yes, I've had and I've created all these incredible bonds with people across the world. And now I can say, I have friends in Germany and Austria and Korea. But at the end of the season, when I come back home and I'm in my hometown of Sacramento, I feel a lot more disconnected from my high school experience and from friends and things that happen here, because being a part of the bobsled team and being a bobsledder, I've had to sacrifice, rallies and football games and proms, dances, and other hangouts and everything that happens while I'm away. So it definitely takes more effort on my part to stay connected to the people I really care about at home, but it's definitely been a sacrifice, and it sucks sometimes to have to miss out on those typical high school experiences. But really, it's all worth it because bobsledding is something that I've chosen to pursue and I love doing it. So although it sucks, it's something that it's all worth it for.
And you're speaking to a broader topic around mental health, which is huge in sports right now. And how do you balance, we'll say, the mental aspects of sport, the mental side of sport, with everything else going on being a teenager? Like, that is not to be underestimated for adults alone. There's a lot of conversation today about the mental health challenges that athletes face, and especially at such a young age. How do you cope with the mental highs and lows that come with the intense demands of bobsled at this level? Not to mention life as a teenager.
Yeah, mental health is very serious, and it's also very prevalent in the sports community right now. And I think for me, the best thing is just having support specifically. And for me, that's my mom, and just having her as an outlet and someone to share my feelings to, someone to vent to, someone that I can go and just talk to at the end of the day, so that, I'm not carrying things with me and handling them alone and having them cloud my mind for the next training days. Just having that outlet and being able to use her to help me reset for the next training days, along with everything that, I can do physically and rest and eating right, just to make my mind feel good and my body feel good, taking care of myself that way. I think really having someone who has my best interests at heart and having that support system behind me that I can use is the best thing for my mental health while I'm on tour.
Really incredible, and really incredible the awareness around the topic, and how you're being very thoughtful and deliberate about acknowledging that as part of your overall plan to success. That it's not just the physical side, that there's a huge psychological component, and looking at that in a very deliberate way. And I also take from our conversation that coaches have been huge, and it sounds like you have amazing coaches and a support system within that network, which isn't always the case at a youth level. And so I'd love to hear from your experience. What is it about it that's made it such a positive experience that you'd like to share? Maybe that other youth coaches could take from that.
Yeah, so obviously I have my dad as my coach, and he's the biggest coach in my life, and I could go on and on about my experience with him, but I need to shout out my youth Olympic coach during the tour, who was Brian Berghorn, and he was just absolutely incredible. He was such a great coach. He was so knowledgeable and patient and understanding, and he taught me so much about competing, about bobsled itself, and about sled mechanics, which is really important for us. And he was so instrumental into bringing new athletes into the program. He cared about his athletes. He cared about me and my teammates as individual athletes. He helped us through everything. So he I mean, even now, Brian isn't necessarily a coach anymore, but he still checks in on his athletes and just wants the best for us. So, as for qualities of a great coach go, my dad is my dad, and I know he'll always love and support me no matter what. So I can take my experience with him, but having Brian as someone who has absolutely no relation to me, and him being a coach for me, he is just a shiny example for me of what a great coach should be, of being knowledgeable and patient and understanding of his athletes and knowing what it takes to be a bobsledder, as well as being able to coach all his athletes at different skill levels. He was an incredible coach.
He sounds an absolute fantastic coach. And you just knew how he cared about you. He cared about you as an individual athlete and the other athletes. How did you know that?
I think something that is really important is being able to tailor your coaching to each individual athlete. The way that me and my teammates learned the sort of track was different from athlete to athlete. And Brian was really great about teaching us how it helped us the best, showing us ways and coaching us in ways that each helped us individually, as well as checking in on us as individual athletes and showing us that he notices when I would get stressed out because of the racing aspect and reminding me this is a two heat race and checking in on me and reminding me to go out there and have fun and trust that I know what to do, as well as taking care and providing that same thing for my other teammates. You could just tell that Brian really cared about bobsled as a sport, really cared about his athletes, and cared about bringing us youth into the sport of bobsled.
How important do you think that coaching, both from your father and also from Brian, was to where you are today?
Coaching is absolutely everything. Honestly, without my coach, the bobsled is so mentally difficult. It's so physically difficult. The technicality of everything is so difficult. So, having a great coach who knows how to teach you, who is a great support system, who can just provide everything you need, they're everything. They're the foundation to what we do. Without an athlete without a coach, we would be completely lost, especially me going into bobsled having no previous track experience in pushing. That's another thing. Having Brian there to help teach us how to push, and having other coaches in my life who have helped train me and helped teach us how to do that side of the sport, as well as the driving, everything. Our coaches are just the foundation to building us up as athletes and teaching us what to do.
Youth athletes are encouraged to try multiple sports early on and then specialize later on. You are unique in bobsledding in that you've specialized somewhat earlier than the typical window of early 20s. What's your thought on that for athletes?
I think it depends. I think a good piece of advice for young athletes who are starting out and maybe wanting to specialize in a specific sport and pursue that is to really push yourself to those goals and really, push yourself out of the comfort zone, try and achieve all the goals you want. But I think it's also really important to remember to give yourself grace. Give yourself a grace period to have failures, to learn from those, and to treat your body and your mind right, because sports are hard and they take a lot of toll on you. So just remembering as a young athlete, especially, to give yourself the grace period, let yourself fail, and learn from all of those mistakes.
What would you say is the most difficult thing that you've had have faced over, your short career?
I'd say the most difficult, really the journey and trying to, I'd say one of the biggest obstacles actually that I've had to personally overcome is not coming from a track athlete background. In bobsled specifically, having that experience and having knowing how to sprint and having that explosiveness that it takes to be a track athlete really applies when it comes to learning how to push. So, having not come from a track background at all, I've had to overcome the obstacle of one, learning how to sprint, and then two, learning how to apply that to my pushing skills and learning how to push. So that's definitely been the biggest obstacle and something that I'm still learning to do and still trying to overcome and get better at. So that's definitely the biggest obstacle in my specific sport that I've had to deal with.
And it sounds like that while it's advantageous to come from other sports, particularly track and field or sports where there's a lot of power and explosiveness, from your experience and your journey, you've shown that it's not required, that, you've had some softball experience and a youth sports background, but not necessarily the most transferable into it. And it sounds like, that your advice or that you're giving to athletes, or would you give this advice to them that it is possible to try bobsled. And even if you don't have, if you're not a track athlete or from maybe a sport like football.
Yeah, I definitely say, and I'd even say this applies to any sport that maybe you don't have, maybe you tried something out, you have experience and it doesn't necessarily transfer over. But from my experience in bobsledding, not coming from the track background, having to really overcome the obstacle of learning to sprint and learning to push and all other odds against me, that it is possible. And that if you really put your mind to it and stay dedicated and set that goal that you want to achieve, it is something that you can do.
Is there something that you would like people to know about that may not necessarily be obvious to the rest of us?
I'd say, I mean, like I said earlier, there's a lot of sacrifices that come from competing at that high level. But overall, my experience, especially in the Youth Olympic Tour, has been so positive. And so thankfully to the coaches that I have behind me and to the support and the organizers of the IBSF and of the Youth Olympic Tour, everything has been such a positive experience. And I think that's really what's made me such a great athlete is having, being able to be a part of something that is so positive.
Incredible. Emily, what's next for you? What's next on the horizon, your next big goal that you're training for?
I have a lot of goals in my life. I want to, like I said, I wanted to go to I want to go to college. I'm focusing on applications. I want to endeavor in sports broadcasting in college. I want to become a lawyer, so law school is definitely in the books for me. But as far as bobsledding goes, that's still definitely a goal for me. And I'm aiming to shoot for the 2030 and 2034 Olympic Games are where I want to be.
Incredible. Well, I wish you the very best of luck, and I'm sure all our Cool Play community and audience are cheering for you too. I'm very excited to follow your journey. So it's such a fun conversation, and I've learned a lot. I've learned really so much about bobsledding, and so many of the experiences I can relate to having been an athlete. But it's just been so refreshing to hear you, and I'm listening, and I'm thinking that I wish I had some of the knowledge and the experience and that you've had, and I really want to commend you and acknowledge you and how you're navigating what is a very tough journey and unique. What a conversation, and I want to thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on here. I love speaking to you, and this is a really great conversation.
Brilliant. How about we will finish up with 5 short questions, a fun rapid round.
Okay, perfect.
Wonderful. Okay, first question. The coolest thing about playing sports is?
Making all the different friends.
I love that. 3 words to describe your experience of sports today.
Ooh, I'd say there's definitely been difficulty, there's been challenges, but it's also been overall positive and excellent.
Favorite athlete and why?
Favorite athlete. Honestly, I'll say Michael Bradley, who is my dad, because he inspires me in so many different ways. And he's really just been so instrumental in my journey. And he's achieved so much in his career that he just inspires me.
Beautiful. Sport is?
Sport is sport is amazing. Sport is, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can describe sport, really. I don't think there's any one word that you can, sport is so many different things. There's so many different avenues in sport. So amazing.
Beautiful. And the final one, if leaders in youth sport knew what you knew and really hear your perspective, what would they do differently?
I think really a lot of what I talk about is bringing the positivity to sport because of how difficult it is. So I think youth leaders, I took really on a leadership role in the sport of bobsled, in the youth tour specifically. So I'd say just make it positive, make it fun, encourage athletes to continue to love their sport and not have, go through the challenges, but continuing to absolutely love and thrive.
Amazing. A pleasure, Emily, an absolute pleasure.